right, welcome back to class. In the previous lesson, the last lesson precisely, we looked at the sprint retrospective. So we've covered the sprint planning, daily scrum, sprint retrospective, and now we would be looking at the sprint itself. We've seen this slide in the previous module, in module 1, but we want to expand further on it from the understanding of module 2, where we now have the knowledge of the 5 events in Scrum. I mentioned when that module 2 started that the events could also be called ceremonies, or in rare cases, it's also called rituals. The 5 rituals in Scrum. I still prefer that, rituals, though. All right, so we're looking at what happens in a sprint, and we would be adding the previous events, the 4 other events that's talking about the sprint planning, the daily scrum, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective in this narration of what happens within a sprint. I believe by now everyone understands that the sprint could be between 1 to 4 weeks. And what this clearly means is that a team sticks with a plan. It could be 1 week sprint, 2 week sprints, 3 week sprints, or 4 week sprints. That means a sprint cycle could be for 1 week, that is from start to finish. Then another sprint starts within the same immediately. So a sprint ends into the start of another sprint. That's how it works. It's a cycle. A sprint ends into the start of another sprint. So in most organizations, and ideally too, your last day of the sprint, when you are closing your sprint, that's the sprint retrospective that closes the sprint ideally, should be a start of a new sprint. So no day is lost, except where the team or the organization want the end of a sprint to be by evening of a day, and the following morning starts a new cycle, right? So it's a continuous flow in cycle delivery, right? So I believe every one of us, we have clear understanding of what the duration of a sprint is. I explained in the first module that all other events, the 4 other events, happen within the sprint. So the sprint planning happens within this sprint cycle. The daily scrum or daily stand-up happens within the sprint. The sprint review happens within the sprint. The sprint retrospective happens also within the sprint. So let's have a quick walkover from that understanding forward. So we'll see that the sprint planning would happen at this point, right? Sprint planning here. After you've had your requirement from the stakeholder and the requirement has been built into the backlog, right? Oh, sorry. That was an error. The sprint planning happens here, rather. Sorry about that. The sprint planning happens at this point. When the requirements from the stakeholders have been created into the product backlog, when the requirements from the stakeholders have been created into the product backlog, then the sprint planning comes up, where the team comes together and they pick some of the stories or epics, as the case could be, from the backlog and bring them into the sprint. So the sprint commences at those points. And that is why what they bring into the sprint becomes the sprint backlog. We saw that on our board also, where we looked at this. This is the product backlog, and this upwards, the three upwards, they are the sprint backlog. So we could see that these stories, a few of them were selected from here and moved to different sprint cycle, sprint backlog, right? So we have the sprint backlog here. The same thing happens here, and the sprint starts. So when the sprint starts, the start of the sprint gives us this. This was what we looked at during the daily stand-up itself. So this is what the team works on daily. So every developer, you can see that each of those stories are also assigned to developers. In Scrum, you'll read that from the Scrum guide, that team members self-assign stories. Team members self-assign stories. Well, on the field, it may be different, where the product owner could assign, or differently, where you have a Scrum Master that's also supporting the team well, could also assign. But according to the Scrum guide, team members should self-assign. So it will be what they have clear understanding on and what they can deliver on, right? So each of those is assigned, and on the day-to-day daily stand-up, so this is where the daily stand-up happens. Within here and here, on daily basis, the entire team comes together. I said it's not mandated for the product owner, but on the field you see product owners joining the sprint, daily stand-up. And also, as a Scrum Master, you should ensure that the daily stand-up is not hijacked. What I mean by hijacked means it's not turned into a technical meeting. It's a process meeting. It's a status meeting to inspect and adapt. So on day to day, the team comes around and they look at the board. I also mentioned that at no time should you have a daily stand-up without the board. Please take note of all those. It's important that your board precedes the start of your daily stand-up. So what I do in practice as a Scrum Master, because it's just 15 minutes, while we're joining the meeting, I would have opened my board, and while I join the meeting and saying hello to everyone, how are you doing? I hope you're doing good, things like that, I share my screen straight. So sharing my screen straight keeps the informal conversation short, so that we can quickly narrow down to the agenda of the meeting. And of course, where you share your screen quickly also, it suggests to everyone that your discussion should be around the board. I've taken up teams before that I realized when I newly joined those teams, they were having daily stand-up without looking at the board at all. So they ended up discussing for long. There was a team I once joined that the first daily stand-up I joined them in lasted for 42 minutes. That was lengthy. And they did not even talk about the board. They didn't even show the board at all. So they were just discussing about technicalities. So as a Scrum Master, you should always ensure that conversations are kept around the board. And that's the value the board gives. So you want to keep it short, you want to keep it focused. And each developer takes turn to talk around what they're working on. So let's say this is a daily stand-up. we're still going through what happens within a sprint. This story is assigned to Olufemi Ayokunle. So Olufemi, could you share with us quickly any progress on this story? Then he goes ahead to share what he was able to do yesterday, what he's looking at to do today, if he has any issue that will be looked at. So that's what happens in the daily stand-up. But all this still comes to what happens within the sprint, because the sprint itself is the placeholder of all the events. It's a big box that houses all the events. So that's what happens. So we've seen the sprint planning occurring within a sprint. We've seen the daily stand-up occurring within a sprint. At the end of delivery, right, when the sprint review is coming up, they've delivered an increment here, product increment. We will see also that at the end of a sprint is where the sprint review also happens, which is also still within a sprint, same as the retrospective that happens within a sprint. So that's just a quick overview of what happens within a sprint as related to what we've discussed in Module 1. But from this angle, from the knowledge of us knowing what the sprint planning is, what happens there, back Scrum, daily Scrum, sprint review and sprint retrospective, we could have a better picture of what happens within a sprint. Perhaps you want to have quick catch up of what happens in each of those events. You could go back to the previous lesson. All right, let's move forward. So the sprint and what happens within a sprint, we'll consider all other events as related to the sprint. That's what we've just discussed. We've spoken about the time box of a sprint between 1 to 4 weeks, 1 week sprint, 2 week sprint, 3 week sprint, 4 week sprint. Every sprint should have a sprint goal. Every sprint should have a sprint goal. Let's see that from the board. You can see here, this is the sprint goal. At the end of the sprint, the foundation should be completed according to the given specification. So that is the sprint goal. So all the effort of the team should meet with the sprint goal. And this is where we had the sprint goal on Jira. Let's see. This one has no sprint goal. So let's see. When we come here to edit, we can add the sprint goal here. That's how to add the sprint goal on Jira. When you get to the practicals, you will be able to demonstrate this more. You'll be able to do all this yourself. Of course, that's for those going into the practicals. So this is where you had your sprint goal. Each sprint should have a sprint goal, and that's what we're talking about here. And of course, for each sprint, this is basic. Every agile team or scrum team should be a cross-functional team. It could pose some challenges on the field. Ideally, you should have a cross-functional team, and I've explained in previous module what a cross-functional team means. That means all the skill sets needed are available for you to deliver that value. So in this now, if your sprint goal is at the end of the sprint, the foundation should be completed according to the given specification. So you want to have the laborers that would dig the floor. You want to have those who would move the sand. You want to have those who would move cement to the site. You want to have water available. You want to have all the equipment and machinery available. That would form a cross-functional team. On the field, however, there could be some challenges. Well, not challenges per se. There could be instances where you don't have cross-functional team, or one or two team members is shared. One or two team members could be shared. And what is common on the field is where you have testers. or QA when they are shared. Testers, and that is typical with software development cycles. A tester could be working with multiple teams. Another that could be shared also could be a solution architect, could be working with multiple teams. A tech lead also could be working with multiple teams. Even a product owner, in rare cases, could be working with multiple teams. Scrum masters mostly would be working with multiple teams. Scrum master mostly would be working with multiple teams. I've supported 3-4 teams per time before, so we should keep that to mind. So where you have a cross-functional team, you have all the skill sets needed. Please note that all what we are discussing so far is about a single team. A single team. That is what we are discussing on so far. When we get to the latter end of this module, I believe, that is where we would look at why we need to scale Scrum. That is where the idea of multiple teams would come to play. Okay? So a sprint has iterative delivery. By now, I believe we'll understand what iterative means. Iterative is that cycle delivery from one. So if a team sticks to 2 weekly sprints, right? If a team sticks to 2 weekly sprints, at the end of a 2-week cycle, they should deliver a value. As that cycle is ending, another is commencing. So they are picking some set of work items again to deliver a new value. They are picking again to deliver a new value. When we look at this picture for a moment, we would see at the end of each sprint, they've delivered a piece of value. That is what is called product increments. So while that begins to build up, you begin to have the increments building up. And at the end of all, you have a product that is fully delivered or project that is fully delivered. Okay? So that's what iterative delivery is. And of course, a sprint has feedback loop. There are different ways by which the team has feedback loop. The daily stand-up is one of the ways we have feedback loop. Of course, I've mentioned again and again that the product owner works with the team consistently and works also with the stakeholder. So the product owner is joining the daily stand-up and helping the team adapt to few changes. All those events would give us the avenue for feedback and how to improve the team. Sprint planning, we are bringing in new stories and we are planning what the stakeholders want as feedback, or end users will implement it. Sprint review, we do the same thing. So we see that in the sprint, as designed by Scrum, feedback loop is continuous. In Waterfall, I made mention of that when I was going through the module 1. In Waterfall, there are 2 points of contact to have feedback. That is at the beginning when you are meeting with the stakeholder, and at the end when you are delivering the value. So most often, the team ends up delivering what is different from what the stakeholder wants. But in Scrum and in Agile, precisely, there's a lot of feedback loop. Then, of course, it's flexible and adaptable because it allows for changes. All those feedback mechanism makes it flexible. Of course, it makes it transparent too. So we can see transparency, inspection, and adaptation come into play again. That's making reference to the empiricism of Scrum. And of course, at the end of each sprint, you should have a shippable product increment. For those who will be taking the product owner training, we would explain further the various types of shippable product increments, right? But just know that at the end of each sprint for this class, there would be a shippable product increment. And that, of course, is the value that has been delivered. So this is a shippable product increment. So it adds up on and on until the whole product is delivered. So let's put it in a perspective. Let's use the building illustration that we've been having. So while we're going into the sprint, let's assume we're using a 1 weekly sprint. At the beginning of the sprint, we said by the end of the sprint, we want to lay all the blocks in the soakaway and the septic tank. Right? In the last sprint, let me go back to this. Let's assume the last sprint goal was at the end of the sprint, we want to dig the soakaway and septic tank according to the given specification. So in each of those stories, the specifications would have been given. So let's now assume that had been delivered in sprint 1 and in sprint 2. So at the end of sprint 1, we have now dug the soakaway and the septic tank. Now in sprint 2, we're running 1 weekly sprint. So sprint 2 is second week because we are running 1 weekly sprint. So at the beginning of sprint 2, we will now add at the end of this sprint, the soak away and septic tank would be fully laid with blocks according to the given specification. If I update this now, I'll have it added here. So let's now assume we have now got to the end of that sprint 2, meaning the stakeholders would be visiting the site. And what do they expect to see? To see that the soakaway and the septic tank had been fully laid with the blocks according to the specification. So we'll see how and of course that is a shippable increment. Last week's product increment was digging the septic tank and the soakaway. This week product increment is adding to last week's product increment, which is digging laying all the septic tank and the soakaway with blocks. So we could see that the value is increasing as we go on and on and on. Last picture, of course, we don't need much of this since we've shown this from the board, but we can see just in the same as we have on the board, the to-do list, the in progress, the review, and done. I explained to us the last time that you have a choice to create additional columns as you want. You just come here to click the create column button. When we get to practicals, we'll demonstrate that, and add needed columns. So this is to do, this is in progress. In progress shows the work that is being done. Blocker as needed shows that there is a particular work item that has a problem. Review means work had been completed, had been done. It's now to be checked. So when a developer starts his work and moves it to the in progress column. When the developer finishes the work and he has no blocker, he moves it to the review. for the tester to test the work, to check if it meets all what it needs to be done. Let's assume this story was here, right? And the developer starts the story, moving it to the in progress column. Mind you, the Scrum Master is a servant leader or serving leader, not a servant. Please take that clearly. The Scrum Master is a servant leader. I prefer to use the word serving leader, but not a servant. So the Scrum Master does not move the cards for the developers. He coaches them and mentors them to carry out, to be self-organizing, right? So when the developer starts work on it, he moves it to in progress column. From the in progress column, let's assume there is a problem he had and he puts it in the blocker and added the needed comments on it. Mind you, the last time I showed us how to add comments to the story. And what this does when you tag a particular individual is that it sends an email to that individual's email box as a call to action, right? So from here, let's assume I get tagged. I'm the Scrum Master on that particular project, and the developer tagged me along with others. I could look at that story, reach out to anybody that could help us resolve it and escalate upwards. That's talking about Scaled Agile, but I don't want to go into Scaled Agile yet. So when the problem gets resolved, I also come back here and add a comment back to it. Let's say at Femi, I think there's a Femi here. Okay, let me just pick anybody. Let me pick this name. The issue has been resolved. And I save. As I save it, an email will be generated and sent to that person. So because I've resolved the issue, what will I do? I will move that story back to in progress for the developer to continue work on that story. So when the developer checks that the issue has truly been resolved, he can now proceed with it. And when that story is now completed, that particular task is completed, let's use the building sites again. A developer, let's say one of the developers is a laborer and is to move 50 blocks of cement from the store to the site where those blocks will be used. On getting to the store, he realized that there were no more blocks available. So of course that story is blocked, right? He can't proceed on that task. So he raised a ticket and had it in the ticket, moved it to blocked, add it in the ticket, at en route X, no blocks found in the store, and sends it. I receive an email and I work on it. I call whosoever needs to supply the blocks, and at the end of the day, I got a confirmation that the blocks had been supplied. I come back and add it a new ticket. Let's say the developer is Adebola. Blocks had been supplied. Please progress with work. And I save it also. Right? Because I've confirmed, I move it back to in progress. So he comes back, he receives a ticket that has been resolved. He moves all the blocks needed for that day It moves all the blocks needed for that day from the store to the site, and he moves his task to review because he had finished what he needs to do. Then the QA or the tester or the supervisor receives, of course, he could also add a column. I always encourage every developer, anytime you move a ticket, add a comment to it and tag whosoever needs to be tagged. Let me tag another person. Let's assume Uloma is the supervisor. Task has been completed. Please review. So because I sent this, Uloma receives an email that the task has been completed, comes around to check if you've done the task according to the specification, and finds out that you've done it according to the specification. If you have not done it according to the specification, she also adds a comment to it, what needs to be done, if you've not done it properly, and move the story back to in progress for you and tags you along with it. So it makes work to be transparent. It makes work to be efficient, right? So when that is done, but when she finds out that you've done it properly, then she moves the ticket to the accepted column and also adds a comment. Let's assume the product owner is named Bamiyo, Johnson Bamiyo is the product owner. Work item has been reviewed and found completed. For instance, it could be anything. So he sends this also. So the product owner is the only person who at the end of the day accepts work as done properly. No one else in the team does, except where the product owner is not around. The Scrum Master could step into that shoe to do that on behalf of the product owner, which is in very rare cases. Mind you, the product owner is the mid gap between the stakeholder that owns the work. Stakeholder could be business, could be management, could be end users, could be government, could be departments, and the team. If you look at this, any work item completed gets crossed out. Others with that is not in this done column is not crossed yet. If I move this out, this HP 37, HP stands for house project, ticket number 37. If I move it back to accepted, the strike out gets removed, right? So that shows from the board, it shows transparency further that the work had been thoroughly done. So that is how each work item moves in a sprint from column to column to column to column until when it's fully done. All right, so that would be the end of this class. If you need to go over this, please do. If you have any questions, please raise them across and we shall look at them. See you again in the next class.